The last week of Adolf Hitler in the Führer bunker, April 20th to May 2nd, 1945. April 20th, 1945, the Führer's last birthday. The morning of Hitler's 56th birthday began under the thunder of Soviet artillery. For the first time, Red Army shells reached the center of Berlin. In the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery, almost the entire leadership of the Third Reich gathered. Göring, Himmler, Goebbels, Bormann, Ribbentrop, Dönitz, Keitel, Traudl, and Speer. They had come to congratulate their leader, most of them for the last time. Albert Speer later wrote in Inside the Third Reich, Hitler looked aged, his left hand trembled, and he was stooped. He moved with a shuffling gait, and it was difficult to believe that this was the same man I had known 10 years earlier. His pilot Hans Bauer observed, he was a shadow of his former self. Around midday, Hitler went up to the Chancellery Garden, where he awarded Iron Crosses to about 20 Hitler Youth boys who had distinguished themselves in defending Berlin. This is the last newsreel footage in which he appears. A military conference followed, in which the generals begged him to leave for Obersalzberg before the southern corridor was sealed. Hitler hesitated, but answered, "How can I call upon the troops to fight the decisive battle for Berlin if I myself withdraw to safety?" Per Nikolaus von below. In the evening, a modest tea was held with Eva Braun, the secretaries, and Magda Goebbels. Traudl Junge recalled, Eva tried to organize dancing to the only record we had, Blood Red Roses. It was eerie. The world was collapsing above us, and we were spinning in a waltz. Around midnight, most of the Reich's leaders left Berlin forever. April 21st, 1945, rage and the collapse of illusions. Berlin was now caught in a half-encirclement. Marshal Zhukov's First Belarusian Front pounded the government quarter without pause. Hitler ordered SS General Felix Steiner to launch an immediate counterattack from the north with Army Group Steiner, a unit existing almost only on paper. Hitler shouted into the telephone, "Any commander who holds back his troops will answer with his head within 5 hours. Steiner will answer with his head for carrying out the order." Recorded in OKW minutes. All day, the Führer awaited a report on the offensive success. Hans Krebs and Alfred Jodl avoided answering directly. Goebbels wrote in his diary, "The Führer still believes that a miracle will occur, as it did for Frederick the Great. But fate does not always repeat itself." Theodore Morel administered ever more injections, caffeine, methamphetamine, vitamins. Krista Schroeder noted, his eyes had become glassy, and his hands shook so violently that he could not lift a spoon to his mouth. That night, a bomb struck the Chancellery directly above the bunker. The walls trembled and plaster rained down. Eva Braun per Junge said, "Better this than doing nothing." April 22nd, 1945, the breakdown and the decision to die in Berlin. This was the day of psychological collapse. At the afternoon conference, Hitler demanded a report on Steiner's offensive. Krebs and Jodl admitted, there had been no attack, the troops did not exist. The Führer's reaction shocked even hardened generals. Jodl testified at Nuremberg. Hitler shouted for 3 hours. For the first time, he openly declared that the war was lost. He accused the SS, the army, and the entire general staff of treachery. I had never seen him in such a state. The minutes recorded, "The war is lost. But if you, gentlemen, believe that I will leave Berlin, you are gravely mistaken. I would rather put a bullet through my head." Eva Braun wrote her last letter to her sister Gretel. "The end is near. I will stay with the Führer until the very end. I do not understand how I ever lived without him. Give mother my love." Magda Goebbels and her 6 children moved permanently into the bunker. That same day, Hitler invited Goebbels to share his fate. Goebbels arrived in the evening. Junge recalled, Hitler gathered us women and said, I want you to try to break through to the south. I have nothing more to offer you here but death. We all refused. Eva took his hands. You know that I will stay. April 23rd, 1945, Göring's betrayal. A telegram from Hermann Göring arrived from Berchtesgaden. Under a 1941 decree, power would pass to him if the Führer were rendered incapable of governing. Göring inquired cautiously, My Führer, do you agree that I should assume immediate leadership of the Reich with full freedom of action in accordance with your decree of June 29, 1941? If no reply is received by 2200 hours, I shall assume that you have lost your freedom of action. Bormann, Göring's enemy, seized the moment, whispering to Hitler that this was an ultimatum and high treason. Speer recalled, Hitler flew into an indescribable rage. He called Göring a drug addict, a corrupt opportunist, and blamed him for the destruction of the Luftwaffe. The order was given to arrest the Reichsmarshal and execute him. SS men placed Göring under house arrest. That evening, Speer arrived at the bunker to say goodbye. He confessed that he had sabotaged the Nero decree. Surprisingly, Hitler did not erupt. Speer recalled. He stood silently, looking through me. There was no fire in his eyes anymore. He simply said, So you're leaving? Good. Auf Wiedersehen. Without emotion. It was their last meeting. That night, Soviet forces reached the Teltow Canal, less than 10 kilometers from the bunker. April 24th, 1945, the ring closes. Berlin was now completely encircled. The sewers and U-Bahn tunnels became battlegrounds. The garrison under General Helmuth Weidling consisted only of army remnants, the Volkssturm, and Hitler Youth Boys. Hitler still clung to illusions. On the map, he kept moving non-existent divisions, Bussy's 9th Army, Wenck's 12th Army. Wenck did indeed begin advancing toward Berlin, kindling hope. Hitler shouted, Wenck. Where is Wenck? A phrase that became almost ritualistic per Otto Günsche. Life in the bunker took on a surreal character. Erich Kempka, Hitler's chauffeur, recalled, in the corridors of the upper level, people drank champagne, danced, embraced. It was a bacchanal of despair. Magda Goebbels began preparing her children for death. Junge wrote, The children played in the corridors, sang songs for Uncle Führer. Magda smiled at them, then went to her room and wept. She was firmly convinced, my children must not live in a world without National Socialism. April 25th, 1945, the meeting on the Elbe. At Torgau on the Elbe, American and Soviet troops met. Germany was cut in two. In Berlin, fighting raged at Potsdamer Platz, only hundreds of meters from the Chancellery. The bunker shook from explosions. Hitler spent the day in apathy interrupted by bursts of rage. He dictated to Gerda Christian a radio message. Berlin will remain German. Vienna will once again become German, and Europe will never be Russian. Admiral Karl Donitz, at Plön in the north, received contradictory orders. He later wrote, I understood that the Führer was no longer in control of the situation, but I was bound to do my duty. Inside the bunker, conditions worsened. The air grew stale. The diesel generator faltered. Bauer recalled, the smell of sweat, tobacco, machine oil, and fear hung everywhere. The lights flickered. The telephones worked only sporadically. Hitler shuffled his feet, his left hand trembling constantly. He drove Morel away, suspecting the doctor wanted to drug him and smuggle him out of the city. April 26th, 1945, the arrival of Grime and Reich. A small aircraft broke through into Berlin and landed near the Brandenburg Gate. On board were Colonel General Robert Ritter von Grime and the famous test pilot Hannah Reich. During the landing, Grime was wounded by Soviet anti-aircraft fire. Hitler appointed Grime commander-in-chief of the Luftwaffe in place of the traitor Göring, promoting him to field marshal. Reich later testified, "I asked, 'My Führer, why did you have him brought here? A radio message would have sufficed.' He answered, 'When such an appointment is made, I must convey it personally.'" Reich recalled, "The atmosphere was ghastly. Eva Braun talked constantly about fashion and better days. Magda Goebbels sat with her children and sang to them. Hitler showed me a cyanide capsule and said, 'Anna, I have no hope. I do not even trust the poison. Himmler sent it, and Himmler cannot be relied upon either.'" That same day, Soviet assault groups advanced as far as the Tiergarten. Artillery fire became almost continuous. April 27th, 1945, suspicions and executions. Berlin was in agony. Chekhov's and Kuznetsov's forces tightened the noose. Hitler grew increasingly paranoid. He ordered the arrest and execution of SS-Gruppenführer Hermann Fegelein, husband of Eva's sister Gretel, who had left the bunker without permission. Fegelein was found in civilian clothes, with a suitcase of money and jewels, a clear desertion attempt. Despite Eva's pleas, Hitler was unrelenting. Günsche testified. The Führer said, "He has dishonored his uniform, dishonored the family. He will be shot." Fegelein was executed in the Chancellery Garden. Hitler spoke ever more of death. At a conference, he declared, "I will not fall alive into the hands of an enemy who will stage a spectacle organized by Jews to entertain hysterical masses." Couriers made their way through the U-Bahn tunnels at the risk of their lives. Junge recalled, "We existed as if in a submarine, without day or night, in stale air, under constant explosions." April 28th, 1945, Himmler's betrayal and the wedding. Devastating news reached the bunker via a Reuters broadcast. Heinrich Himmler, der True Heinrich, had been negotiating with Count Folke Bernadotte for surrender to the Western Allies. Hitler's reaction was terrifying. Junge recalled. His face turned crimson, then gray. He held the telegram in a trembling hand and screamed, "This is the most shameful betrayal in world history." Then he fell silent. Reich added, "He raged like a madman." The color of his face changed beyond recognition. Hitler ordered Himmler's arrest. He also realized there was nothing left to wait for. He summoned a notary, Walter Wagner, to formally marry him to Eva Braun. The ceremony took place around midnight in a small dining room. The witnesses were Goebbels and Bormann. After a brief wedding banquet with champagne, Hitler withdrew to dictate his political testament. Junge recalled, "I expected revelations, explanations, some final truths." But he dictated the same monologue about international Jewry that he had 10 years earlier. Nothing new. That is what struck me most of all. April 29th, 1945, the Testaments and the Death of Mussolini. Hitler completed 2 documents, a personal will and a political testament. He named his successors, Karl Donitz as Reich President, Joseph Goebbels as Reich Chancellor, Martin Bormann as Party Minister. Göring and Himmler were expelled from the party for treason. The testament concluded with a call for merciless resistance to international Jewry. In the morning, news arrived. Mussolini and Clara Petacci had been shot by Italian partisans. Their bodies hung upside down at Piazzale Loreto in Milan. This convinced Hitler. He must not fall alive into enemy hands. Linge recalled, "The Führer said, 'I will not allow myself to be displayed in a cage like an animal in a zoo.'" Hitler tested cyanide on his dog Blondie. Sergeant Fritz Tornoff forced the capsule into the dog's mouth. The animal died instantly. Junge wrote, "Hitler entered the room, looked at the dead Blondie, and his face became like a mask. That evening came the final blows. Wenck's army had been thrown back. Bussy's troops were destroyed. From Italy came reports of Army Group C's surrender. When asked about the front, Hitler merely waved his hand. April 30th, 1945, the suicide of the Führer. Hitler held his final military conference. Weidling reported that fighting raged only 300 meters from the bunker, and ammunition would run out within 24 hours. The Führer authorized small group breakouts, but no capitulation. Around midday, Hitler had lunch with Eva and his secretaries. Junge recalled, "It was an ordinary meal, spaghetti with tomato sauce." He talked about dogs, about breeding pedigrees. Not a word about death. Afterward, he began his farewells, shaking each hand and mumbling something inaudibly. Magda Goebbels fell to her knees, begging him to leave Berlin. He silently brushed her aside. Around 15:30, Hitler and Eva withdrew to his study. Linge and Bormann stood by the door. A few minutes later, a single shot rang out. Linge entered. Hitler sat on the sofa, with a gunshot wound to his right temple, the Walther PPK on the floor. Eva was beside him, no visible wounds. She had taken cyanide. Günsche testified. The smell of bitter almonds and gunpowder hung in the room. The bodies were carried into the Chancellery garden, doused with about 200 liters of petrol, and set on fire. Goebbels, Bormann, Günsche, and Linge gave a final Nazi salute beneath Soviet shells. Kemke recalled, "The flames rose high. We stood in silence. It was the end." May 1st, 1945, the death of the Goebbels family. In the morning, Goebbels, Reich Chancellor for a single day, sent General Krebs to Zhukov with a proposal for a ceasefire. Zhukov demanded unconditional surrender. Goebbels refused. "I will never sign a capitulation." Around 2000 hours, Magda and Joseph Goebbels carried out their dreadful decision. According to Günsche and SS Dr. Helmut Kunz, who administered morphine to the children, Magda herself crushed cyanide ampoules in their mouths. 6 children, Helga, Hilda, Helmut, Hold, Hedda, and Heidi, aged 4 to 12, were killed in their beds. Magda then sat in silence, laying out a game of solitaire. Around 2100 hours, Joseph and Magda went up into the Chancellery garden. Accounts differ. Either they took cyanide and were shot by an adjutant for certainty, or they shot themselves. Their bodies were also doused with petrol and burned, but the fire was weak. The charred corpses were later identified by Soviet soldiers. That night, the bunker's principal inhabitants, Bormann, Axmann, Kemke, Günsche, Linge, the secretaries, attempted to break out through the U-Bahn tunnels and across the Spree. Most were killed or captured. Bormann, by the most reliable account, took his own life near the Lurter Bridge. May 2nd, 1945, the fall of Berlin. In the pre-dawn hours, General Weidling signed the surrender of the Berlin garrison. At 1500 hours, Soviet troops entered the Reich Chancellery. The bunker was still filled with smoke. In the corridors lay empty bottles, scattered documents, and photographs. On the floor lay the bodies of guards who had committed suicide. In the garden, charred remains were discovered, later identified as Hitler and Eva Braun, primarily by their dental bridges, recognized by dental assistant Kathy Huserman. The Goebbels children were found in their beds, dressed in their best clothes. Magda had dressed them before death. Marshal Zhukov reported to Moscow, "Berlin has been taken." In the underground of the Reich Chancellery, corpses have been found, presumed to be those of Hitler and his entourage. Stalin replied, "So that's how it ends, the scoundrel. A pity we couldn't take him alive." Above the Reichstag, the Soviet banner of victory had flown for hours. The 1,000-year Reich, lasting 12 years and 3 months, ceased to exist. Hitler's last week in the bunker became, in the words of Hugh Trevor Roper, author of The Last Days of Hitler, one of the strangest and most ghastly chapters in the history of mankind. The end of a myth in an underground vault, amid rats, smoke, and betrayal.